Folks, today a special guest on my show, Richard Sterban from the Oak Ridge Boys is here with us, and he's here to tell us all about the Oak Ridge Boys and his great career. Welcome, Richard.
Well, John, thank you. It's my pleasure to be on your show. My pleasure to talk to you and to all your fine viewers and listeners out there.
Well, Richard, have you ever been to, to Tupelo area?
On many occasions, you're close to a lot of the casinos down there, right along in the Mississippi Delta, and we have played most of them, I think, over the course of the years. So we're familiar with your part of the country. Yes, we are.
Now, one thing about Tupelo, it's big-time Elvis fans here, and I know you've got a little bit of a close relationship with Elvis. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
For about 2 years, just before I joined the Oak Ridge Boys, I sang in a group called J.D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet. And we were Elvis's backup group. I happened to be in the right place at the right time when I joined J.D. Sumner and the Stamps, and we got a phone call from Elvis. He was looking to hire a new backup group, and he hired J.D. Sumner and the Stamps. So here I was, a young guy in my 20s, but I happened to be in the right place at the right time. I found myself on stage with the biggest star in the world back then, the king of rock and roll himself, Elvis. And it was a very interesting period of time in my life. I got to know Elvis just a little bit. I have some great memories, fond memories of the times that I spent with Elvis. And now that many years have passed and I look back on that, I feel like I'm very fortunate to have been able to do that.
Okay, so how did you basically transition from Elvis when you sang with J.D. Sumner and the Stamps to the Oak Ridge Boys? There's a little bit of a story there, right?
There really is. Here I was, apparently on top of the world, singing with the king of rock and roll. And one day, just out of the clear blue, I got a phone call. And it was from William Lee Golden of the Oak Ridge Boys. Now, William Lee, he's the guy in our group. He's probably the most recognizable character in our group. He's the guy with the long beard. You can't miss him. He's like I say, he's very, very recognizable. But back then, he did not have that long beard. He was Mr. GQ. He certainly was. But anyway, he told me on the telephone that the bass singer that the Oak Ridge Boys had that was leaving the group, and the Oak Ridge Boys wanted to know if I would be interested in taking the job. So here I was, apparently on top of the world, singing with Elvis, singing with the king of rock and roll, but I had to make a decision. What do I do? And I have to admit that, at the same time, I was a big fan of the Oak Ridge Boys. I loved the music that they were making. I actually collected their records, and I really felt like the group had a great deal of potential. So I made the decision back in 1972 to leave Elvis and to join the Oak Ridge Boys. And back then a lot of people questioned that decision. How could you do that? How could you leave Elvis and join the Oak Ridge Boys? But I really believe deep down inside I was doing the right thing. I followed my heart. And now here, 50 years later, a little over 50 years, I can look back and think, wow, I think back then I made a pretty good decision.
You were very young, 6, 7 years old, and you started with singing gospel or in the church, right? Correct?
Well, you're right about that. I have an interesting story. The first singing that I ever did, believe it or not, was as a boy soprano. Oh. I know that's probably hard to believe, but I was in church. I was in Sunday school, and I don't remember the song that I sang, but I still can remember that experience of me being in front of the congregation in church and singing. And I think I felt impressed that day that this is probably what I was meant to do with my life. I think I was meant to be in front of people singing. I'm a huge baseball fan, and I dreamed about being a ball player at one time, but it didn't take me very long in life to realize I did not have the talent or the ability to be a ball player. So I followed my dream of being a singer. And my voice, I had a high voice till I got into junior high school. In the 7th grade, I was still singing tenor in the glee club, but over the summer, between 7th grade and 8th grade, my voice made a change. It made a drastic change. And I went back, and for my 8th grade year, the choir teacher could not believe the difference. She ended up putting me in the second bass section, and I've obviously been there ever since.
There was a lot of basically guidance and luck, I think, in your career along with the Oak Ridge Boys, I guess. And one of the big influences I hear from to the Oak Ridge Boys and you was Johnny Cash, correct?
There is no question about that. You know, we've had a lot of great things happen to us over the last 50 years. But getting to know Johnny Cash comes really at the top of that list. You know, back when we were kind of a struggling act, Johnny Cash, took us under his wing, so to speak, and he really helped us out. He booked us on some dates. He paid us more money than we were worth. Every time you work a date, you sign a contract. He always paid us more than what the contract called for. That's the kind of person he was. But I'll never forget, there was something very special that happened. We were working in Las Vegas with Johnny Cash, and he called us up one afternoon. He said, "Fellas, I want to talk to you guys. Come to my room." And, we were kind of a struggling act back then. We had no other dates booked after that date with Johnny Cash. We didn't know how we were going to keep our group together. Johnny Cash, he could sense that. So we got to his room, and he said, "Fellas, I can tell your heads are hanging. You're struggling." He said, "But I also can tell there's something very special about you guys. So what I want you to do is try to find a way to stay together. Don't give up. Because if you give up, you will never realize your dream. Stay together." He said, "I will help you as much as I can." He said, "But it's up to you. You got to find a way to stay together." So to make a long story short, obviously we found a way to stay together, and I'll never forget. He said, he said, "If you stay together, I promise you, good things are going to start happening to you guys." So I remember when we walked out of that room, instead of our heads hanging, we all looked at each other and we said, "Wow, if Johnny Cash thinks we can make it, we are going to make it." And sure enough, good things did start happening to us. We met our manager, Jim Halsey, who's still our manager today. He signed us to our first record contract with ABC Dot Records. We started having hit records, and a few years later, we won our first award for Vocal Group of the Year.
Wow.
And I'll never forget when they announced us, we went up onto the stage. Instead of going to the left to the podium to receive our award, we went to the right to the podium there because Johnny Cash was standing there. He was hosting the show. And we went up and we all hugged his neck. And he said in that big booming voice of his, he said, "See, fellas, I told you so." So you never know how things are going to happen in your life. And as I said, I don't think there would be an Oak Ridge Boys today if it wasn't for the help and the encouragement we got from Johnny Cash.
Do you all influence any other groups like now, modern day?
We've tried to do that over the years. We're grateful that Johnny Cash helped us. So whenever young guys come and talk to us, we try to encourage them to stick with it. We've had several young guys come up to us and tell us that you guys have inspired us to want to be in this business. And so that makes us feel very good that we have influenced young people, and it's just a great thing. And we've always tried to do that. Not only do we want to be remembered as an act that has made a real impact on the music business, but we also want to be remembered as an act that helped people with our music. And we've tried to do that, as well as at the same time trying to encourage young guys that are trying to make it in our business.
You sang for President George Herbert Walker Bush's funeral, and you also have a little story of how you met the president, or at the time of vice president, right?
That's another one of the greatest things that has ever happened to the Oak Ridge Boys, our friendship that we established with George Bush and Barbara Bush. They were just wonderful people. George Bush was the vice president at the time. Ronald Reagan was the president, and Ronald Reagan invited the Oak Ridge Boys to sing at the Congressional Barbecue on the lawn of the White House. And I'll never forget this. We were on the lawn of the White House that afternoon doing a sound check. We were actually doing a little bit of a rehearsal. This tall gentleman came walking across the lawn of the White House, came up on the stage, and he introduced himself as Vice President George Bush. He did not have to do that. Of course, we recognized him immediately. But he said, "Fellas, I want to tell you, I'm a big fan, and I cannot be at the concert tonight. would you guys be willing to do a few songs for me right here, right now? We said, sure, Mr. Vice President, what would you like to hear? And we realized then that he was really telling us the truth, because what he wanted to hear was not necessarily the hits. He wanted to hear album cuts, deep cuts. And so we realized then that he was familiar with our music, is what I'm trying to say. And right there on the spot that afternoon, we proceeded to give him a little mini concert right there on the lawn of the White House. That day, we established a friendship with him that lasted until he passed away. And while he was president, we sang at many events for him. After he left the White House, we would go to Kennebunkport with our wives, hang out with George and Barbara Bush. We'd go fishing with him. And of course, he'd always want us to do little mini concerts in his living room. And he'd always invite the neighbors over. You know, it was really a special time. But every time we performed for President Bush, he always wanted to hear his favorite song, and that was Amazing Grace. We always sang that for him. Not too long before he passed away, he asked us if we would sing Amazing Grace at his funeral. And we said, sure, Mr. President, we will be there. You can count on us. We had no idea we would be in Spokane, Washington, doing a Christmas show, but we did our Christmas show that night in Spokane, went directly to the airport after the show, got into a private jet that was donated to us by a very dear friend, flew to Houston, got there early in the morning, just enough time to take a quick shower. We went to the church. We met George W. Bush and Jeb Bush, Bush family. They thanked us for doing it. We sang Amazing Grace at President Bush's funeral, which was a very emotional experience, as you can probably imagine.
Sure.
We went back to the airport, flew back to a place called Kennewick, Washington, and we did it all within 24 hours.
Rumor has it that you are a big weather fan. I've been doing weather here in Tupelo, Mississippi, 34 years straight out of school. And have you ever had a chance, an opportunity to you know, when you travel, go to a TV station and do a little bit of weather, or is that something that you haven't done yet?
I've dabbled in that a little bit, not to any great extent, but for many years I've been a Weather Channel junkie, you know, and I've gotten to know some of the personalities on there like they're my best friends, you know, and so I watch it all the time. Because, you know, when I was in college, I actually studied meteorology, and I developed an interest in the weather, and I've maintained that through my life.
Oh, you got some new albums coming out or anything like that?
You know, we are still recording. We're being produced by Dave Cobb. And if that name rings a bell, he's one of the hottest guys in Nashville. And we have plans after the first of the year to go back into the studio with him and work on a new project. I don't have a title yet or even a list of songs. It's still in the talking stages, but we do know that he's agreed to produce us again, and we're going back into the studio doing a new album for next year. And so we're excited about that.
One final Papa Mau Mau from you.
Giddy up, Papa, Mau Mau. How's that?
All righty. Thank you, Richard.